The Price of Pride. The Galactic Hegemony's flagship, Eternal Dawn, hung in space like a blade of obsidian, its crystalline surface absorbing starlight rather than reflecting it. High Admiral Xerix stood on the observation deck, his 4 eyes fixed on the small blue-green planet below. Nova Eden, the humans called it, a frontier colony of barely 5 million souls, but one that had repeatedly refused to acknowledge the hegemony's authority to regulate quantum research in this sector. Their defenses. Xerix's voice carried the characteristic melodic undertones of the Varick species. Minimal, High Admiral, his second-in-command replied. Standard orbital shields, a small defense fleet, nothing that could withstand even a fraction of our power. Xerix's upper eyes blinked in satisfaction, while his lower pair remained fixed on the target. The humans had been an anomaly since their emergence into galactic society 3 centuries ago. While most species took millennia to progress from planetary travel to interstellar civilization, humanity had done it in barely 2 centuries. Their rapid advancement had made many in the hegemony nervous, but Xerix saw only a young race that needed to learn its place. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. "Target their orbital defense platforms only. Let them see what true power looks like." The Eternal Dawn's weapon systems hummed to life, its quantum matrices aligning to deliver a precise strike that would disable Nova Eden's defenses without causing planetary damage. It was meant to be a show of force, a reminder of the natural order of things, but something went wrong. Later, investigations would show that a miscalculation in the quantum harmonics had created a cascade effect. The beam that lanced out from the Eternal Dawn was supposed to be surgical and controlled. Instead, it struck Nova Eden like a hammer of God, its energy multiplying exponentially as it interacted with the planet's defense shields. The resulting explosion consumed nearly a quarter of the continent below. 5 million voices cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. Where there had been cities and forests, mountains and lakes, there was now only a massive crater of molten rock and vaporized dreams. Xerix stood frozen, all 4 eyes wide with horror. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't what he had intended. But as the reports of the catastrophe began flooding in, his training took over. The hegemony could not appear weak, could not admit to mistakes. "Send word to the Council," he commanded, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "Tell them that after repeated warnings, the human colony of Nova Eden attempted to activate an illegal quantum device. In accordance with hegemony law, we were forced to neutralize the threat. There were regrettable casualties." The message was sent, the lie officially recorded. The hegemony's bureaucracy would smooth things over, as it always had. Humans were emotional, yes, but they were also practical. They would protest, demand investigations, but eventually they would accept the official explanation. They had to. What other choice did they have? The answer came 3 days later. Earth's response was transmitted simultaneously to every communication device in the galaxy, bypassing all known security protocols. It was a simple message, just 2 lines. "We know the truth about Nova Eden. You should have prayed while you had the chance." Xerix dismissed it as human dramatics, even as reports came in of strange energy signatures at the edge of human space, even as his analysts reported that Earth had gone completely dark, blocking all standard forms of surveillance. He maintained his composure. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. What could one young species possibly do? But in his quarters that night, as he prepared for sleep, Xerix found himself doing something he hadn't done since he was a child. He prayed, not to any god or cosmic force, but to something deeper and more primal, the universe itself. He prayed that he hadn't just made the greatest mistake in hegemony history. The universe, as it turned out, wasn't listening, but humanity was, and they had spent centuries preparing for exactly this moment, hiding their true capabilities behind a carefully constructed facade of technological limitations. Nova Eden would be avenged, and the price of the hegemony's pride would be paid in full. The storm was coming. And this time, prayers wouldn't be enough to save them. Silent thunder, deep beneath the Mariana Trench, in a facility unknown to even most of Earth's governments, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display of the galaxy. Red markers indicated hegemony strongholds, while blue dots showed human territories. A single black spot marked where Nova Eden had once been. "Project Prometheus is ready," she announced to the assembled military leadership. Her voice carried the weight of 20 years of secret development, of preparations made while humanity played the role of an emerging civilization still finding its footing among the stars. Fleet Admiral James Torres nodded, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic light. "And the hegemony has no idea." "None," Sarah confirmed, gesturing to bring up a new display. "Our quantum masking technology has hidden the true extent of our capabilities for decades. They still think we're struggling with basic gravitic propulsion, while we've already mastered dimensional folding." The room fell silent as a simulation played out, showing the new human ships emerging from what appeared to be tiers in space itself. These weren't the clumsy, conventional vessels humanity had been fielding for centuries. These were predators, built with technology that the hegemony had thought impossible for another 1,000 years. "The Lazarus Protocol was always meant for this," Sarah continued. "Every failed experiment, every limitation we showed them, it was all carefully orchestrated. We knew someday they would reveal their true nature. We just didn't expect it to cost 5 million lives." Admiral Torres stood, his movement drawing all eyes. "The hegemony believes they understand humanity. They think they've seen our best, our worst, our limits. They're wrong. They've only seen what we wanted them to see." He walked to the holographic display, his hand passing through the black spot that had been Nova Eden. "For 3 centuries, we've been the galaxy's orphans, the quick learners, the ambitious upstarts. We played that role perfectly, letting them underestimate us while we prepared. But now we show them what humanity truly is." Sarah finished. "A species that learned to split the atom before we learned to fly. A species that went from horse-drawn carriages to walking on the moon in less than 70 years. We're not just quick learners. We're survivors, adapters, innovators." The next display showed the quantum matrices that powered the new fleet. Technology that didn't just bend the rules of physics, it rewrote them. The hegemony's greatest scientists had theorized such things were impossible. Humanity had simply done it anyway. "First strike capabilities are in place," a younger officer reported. "The Ghost Fleet can deploy to these coordinates instantly." He highlighted several key hegemony military installations. "Their quantum detection networks won't see us coming. They can't detect what they don't believe is possible." Admiral Torres studied the tactical display for a long moment. "They murdered 5 million of our people and called it a security action. They expected us to bow our heads and accept their lies, just as every other species has done for 10,000 years." His voice hardened. "Instead, they're about to learn why humanity has survived every catastrophe our history has thrown at us." "The fleet is ready," Sarah said quietly. "Every ship, every weapon, every system has been tested and verified. We can launch within the hour." Torres nodded slowly. "Send the final warning to Earth's government. Once they give the word, we begin." He turned to face the assembled leaders, his expression grim but determined. "The hegemony believes they are the masters of this galaxy, that their rule is as natural as gravity. They're about to learn that humanity doesn't accept natural laws. We challenge them." As the leaders filed out to their respective posts, Sarah remained behind, watching the holographic display. Somewhere out there, High Admiral Xerix was probably still congratulating himself on maintaining hegemony authority, still believing that humanity would fall in line like all the others. She allowed herself a small, cold smile. The hegemony had ruled through fear and technological superiority for 10 millennia. But they had never faced a species that turned their greatest fears into weapons, that thrived on breaking through supposed impossibilities. They had never faced humanity unleashed. The storm was about to break, and with it, The galaxy would learn why Earth's ancient mythologies had so many gods of war. The Ghost Fleet. The hegemony's primary shipyards at Nexus Prime were considered impregnable. 3 layers of quantum detection grids, backed by the largest concentration of defensive platforms in known space. High Commander Vilix watched from her command center as another patrol fleet returned through the massive energy barriers, her 6-fingered hand tapping a steady rhythm on her console. "Still no signs of human activity?" she asked, more from routine than actual concern. "None, High Commander," her sensor officer reported. "Their colonies remain dark, but their civilian shipping continues as normal. It seems they've accepted the Nova Eden incident as..." The officer never finished his sentence. Reality itself seemed to tear open inside the shipyard's defensive perimeter. Where empty space had been moments before, a fleet of ships now existed. Ships that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. They were angular, predatory, and completely impossible. "How?" Vilix whispered, rising from her chair. "Nothing can breach our quantum barriers." Nothing. But these ships had not breached the barriers. They had simply ignored them, appearing through dimensional tiers that shouldn't have been possible according to every known law of physics. Before Vilix could even order her forces to battle stations, the human fleet opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything the hegemony had ever encountered. Beams of coherent darkness lanced out, and wherever they touched, matter simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply erased from reality itself. Shield systems that could withstand Nova-level energies proved useless against weapons that ignored traditional physics. "All ships, open fire," Vilix ordered, her training finally overcoming her shock. "Launch all fighter squadrons. Contact Central Command," and a holographic projection appeared in the center of her command center, showing a human woman in what appeared to be a scientific rather than military uniform. "High Commander Vilix," Dr. Sarah Chen said calmly, as if she weren't in the middle of destroying the hegemony's greatest shipyard. "Your quantum barriers are impressive. They can stop any form of matter or energy from passing through them. Unfortunately for you, we stopped playing by those rules centuries ago." Around them, the devastation continued. The Ghost Fleet moved with impossible precision, each ship seeming to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Dreadnoughts collapsed, ammunition stores detonated, and defense platforms winked out of existence one by one. "This is impossible," Vilix stated, her professional demeanor cracking. "Our intelligence reports, your technology level, were exactly what we wanted you to see," Sarah finished. "Did you really think a species that went from atmospheric flight to lunar landing in 66 years would take centuries to master basic spaceflight? We showed you what we wanted you to see, let you believe what you needed to believe, while we prepared for this moment." Through the command center's windows, Vilix watched as another dimensional tear opened, this one large enough to swallow a capital ship whole. From it emerged what could only be the human flagship, a vessel that seemed to be made of shifting shadows and impossible angles. "Your people murdered 5 million innocent civilians," Sarah continued, her voice taking on an edge of steel. "You could have admitted your mistake, could have offered reparations, accepted responsibility. Instead, you chose pride. You chose to lie, to cover up your crimes, believing we would be too weak to respond." The shadow ship's weapon systems powered up, and Vilix felt true fear for the first time in her centuries-long life. The readings made no sense. Energy patterns that shouldn't exist, quantum signatures that defied analysis. "We gave you one warning," Sarah said. "We told you to pray. You should have listened." The shadow ship fired, and Vilix finally understood why the humans had chosen that particular warning. In the face of what was happening, weapons that rewrote reality, ships that ignored physical laws, technology that seemed more like sorcery than science, prayer was the only rational response. As her command center dissolved around her, as the pride of the hegemony's fleet was systematically erased from existence, Vilix did pray. But she knew it was too late. The humans hadn't been warning them to pray for salvation. They had been warning them to pray for mercy. And mercy, it seemed, was not on humanity's agenda. In the space of 30 minutes, the greatest shipyard in known space ceased to exist. The ghost fleet vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only floating debris and shattered certainties. Throughout the hegemony, the message was clear. The rules had changed. The natural order had been upended. And this was only the beginning. Breaking the crown. The Grand Council chamber of the hegemony had stood for 10,000 years, its crystalline dome reflecting the light of 3 suns. Now those same suns cast shadows through holes in the once perfect structure, a testament to humanity's methodical dismantling of everything the hegemony had built. Supreme Counselor Xanthor, last of the founding species, watched as emergency reports flooded the holographic displays. Another defense network gone dark. Another fleet vanished without trace. Another stronghold erased from existence. The humans were not just winning. They were unraveling the very fabric of the hegemony's power. "How many systems have gone silent?" he asked, his ancient voice barely a whisper. 47 in the last standard day alone, his aide reported, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. The human fleet. They're not just destroying our military installations. They're offering protection to any world that renounces hegemony authority. And they were accepting. Of course they were. The hegemony had ruled through technological superiority and fear. Now humanity had shattered one and turned the other back upon them. Already, nearly a third of their subject worlds had declared independence, accepting human guarantees of protection. A new hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber, and Xanthor found himself face to face with Admiral Torres. The human looked tired but determined, his uniform bearing the subtle marks of recent combat. "Supreme Counselor," Torres said, his tone carrying neither respect nor hostility, "I assume you know why I'm contacting you." "To accept our surrender?" Xanthor asked, attempting to maintain some dignity in defeat. "No," Torres replied simply. "Surrender implies we want to rule you. We don't. We want something far more difficult. We want you to change." The hologram expanded, showing footage from Nova Eden's last moments. The flash of light, the dissolving continents, the millions of lives extinguished in an instant. This was your response to a colony that refused to submit to your authority, not because they were a threat, but because they dared to question your right to rule. "We have governed the galaxy for 10 millennia, Xanthor protested. "We have maintained order, prevented wars, guided younger species. You've stagnated the natural development of countless civilizations." Torres cut in. "You've suppressed innovation, punished independence, and murdered those who dared to challenge your authority. And you've done it for so long that you actually believe it's your right." New images appeared, countless worlds, species, civilizations that had been kept deliberately primitive, their development artificially stunted to prevent them from threatening hegemony power. "Humanity is different," Torres continued. "We don't want your throne. We don't want to be the new hegemony. We want something far more dangerous. We want change." A new set of holograms appeared, showing human ships appearing above various hegemony worlds. But instead of weapons, they were deploying something else: knowledge. Information packets containing technological specifications, scientific breakthroughs, cultural databases. "We're not just breaking your power," Torres explained. "We're giving it away. Every world, every species that you've kept dependent on you, we're giving them the tools to stand on their own. The knowledge you've hoarded, the technologies you've suppressed, it all ends today." Xanthor felt the weight of 10,000 years pressing down upon him. "You'll create chaos. Without our guidance, without our control, without your oppression," Torres corrected. "These species will have the chance to grow, to develop, to find their own path. Yes, there will be chaos. Yes, there will be mistakes. But they will be their mistakes to make, their challenges to overcome." Outside the council chamber, more ships were appearing. Not to attack, but to broadcast. The truth about Nova Eden. The truth about the hegemony's rule. The truth about humanity's long game of deception and preparation. Your empire is already falling, Torres said quietly. Not through our weapons, but through simple truth. Every world we contact, every species we free, they're choosing to leave you, not because we're forcing them, but because for the first time in millennia, they have a choice. Canfor looked around his grand chamber, at the empty seats where other council members had once sat. Some had fled. Others had chosen suicide rather than face what was coming. He alone remained, last guardian of a dying order. And what of us? He asked finally. What becomes of the hegemony? That depends on you, Torres replied. Accept the new reality. Help us transition your worlds to independence. Share your knowledge freely, and you can be part of building something better. Or resist, and we'll continue dismantling everything you've built, piece by piece, until nothing remains but history. The choice, Sanfor realized, wasn't really a choice at all. The hegemony had already lost, not to superior firepower or better technology, but to an idea. The idea that every species had the right to forge its own destiny. How long? He asked, his voice heavy with resignation. How long have you been planning this? Torres smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the smile of someone who had carried a heavy burden and could finally set it down. Since the day we first looked up at the stars and realized we weren't alone, we knew someday we'd encounter others like you, those who would try to control us, to limit us, to force us into their version of order. So we prepared, we adapted, we evolved. And now we pray, Canfor whispered, finally understanding the true meaning of humanity's warning. No, Torres corrected gently. Now you change. Prayer is for those without the power to affect their destiny. You still have that power, if you're willing to use it wisely. The sun was setting through the broken dome, casting long shadows across the council chamber. With them went the last vestiges of the old order, and the first light of something new began to dawn. Dawn of the new order. 1 year after the fall of the hegemony, the site of Nova Eden had become something none had expected, a symbol of rebirth. Where destruction had once reigned, a massive space station now hung in orbit, its crystalline structures housing representatives from 1,000 worlds. Not an empire's capital, but something far more radical, a forum of equals. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, watching ships arrive through conventional space and dimensional tiers alike. Some belonged to former hegemony worlds, others to species that had been deemed too primitive for contact. All of them now carried the same status: independent, sovereign, free. The Arcanian delegation has just arrived, Admiral Torres reported, joining her at the window. That makes 312 species represented at the confluence. Sarah nodded, noting how the Arcanians' organic ships pulsed with their characteristic bioluminescence. A year ago, they had been restricted to their home system, deemed too unstable for wide space travel. Now their living vessels were among the most sought after in known space. Any word from the Varix? She asked, thinking of former High Admiral Zirix and his fateful decision that had started it all. Their new council has accepted the invitation, Torres confirmed. They're sending scientists rather than military leaders, a promising sign. A flash of light announced another arrival, this one causing several nearby ships to adjust their positions respectfully. The vessel was massive, its hull seemingly woven from strands of pure energy. The Transcendent, humanity's flagship, had arrived for the first confluence. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Sarah mused, watching as more ships emerged from various forms of faster-than-light travel. The hegemony spent 10,000 years convincing everyone that their way was the only way to prevent chaos. That without their control, the galaxy would dissolve into war and anarchy. And instead, Torres prompted, though he knew the answer. Instead, we're seeing the fastest period of technological and social advancement in recorded history. The Prithi have combined their psychic abilities with quantum mechanics to create entirely new forms of communication. The Zarkili have shared their biological engineering secrets, helping a dozen worlds solve their environmental crisis. Even the former hegemony species are contributing, finally free to explore and innovate without restriction. A small alert chimed, and both turned to watch as a new ship appeared. This one bearing the marks of Nova Eden's surviving colonies. They had been off-world when the disaster struck, and now they had chosen to become the guardians of this new forum, a living reminder of both the cost of tyranny and the promise of freedom. Was it worth it? Sarah asked suddenly, her voice quiet. All the years of hiding our true capabilities, playing the part of the naive newcomers, preparing in secret. Torres was silent for a long moment, watching as more ships arrived, each representing a civilization finding its own path. We could have revealed ourselves sooner, he admitted. Could have challenged the hegemony the moment we developed the technology to defeat them. But then we would have just been replacing one empire with another. Instead, we waited until we could offer something better than conquest. We offered choice. Sarah finished. Not human dominance, but true independence for every species. The observation deck trembled slightly as the station's quantum cores aligned, creating the massive dimensional space that would house the confluence. Below them, representatives from hundreds of worlds began making their way to the Great Chamber. Former enemies walked side by side, shared knowledge having replaced ancient feuds. There will be challenges, Torres noted, watching as a group of former hegemony advisors passed by a delegation from a world they had once ruled. Not everyone wants this much freedom. Some will try to rebuild the old power structures, to establish new empires. Sarah smiled, but there was steel in her expression. That's why we're not walking away. Humanity's role isn't to rule or to control. It's to preserve the right of every species to choose its own path, even if that means sometimes protecting them from those who would take that choice away. The final preparations for the confluence were underway. Soon, for the first time in galactic history, representatives from every known spacefaring race would meet as equals, not to submit to an empire's laws or pay tribute to distant rulers, but to forge something unprecedented, a future built on cooperation rather than control. As if to mark the moment, the light of Nova Eden's sun caught the station's crystalline structure, sending rainbow refractions across the assembled ships. In that light, vessels of every conceivable design and origin gleamed together, organic hulls next to quantum matrices, energy beings alongside solid matter, each unique, each valued, each free. We told them to pray, Sarah said softly, but what we really meant was change or fall. The hegemony chose to fall. Everyone else chose to change. And humanity. Torres asked, what did we choose? Sarah watched as the last of the delegates entered the confluence chamber, where the future of a free galaxy waited to be born. We chose to remember what we learned from all our own wars, our own struggles for freedom, that the hardest victory isn't defeating an enemy. It's ensuring you don't become what you fought against. Torres finished. Above them, Nova Eden's sun continued to shine, its light falling equally on all who had gathered beneath it. Not as conquerors or conquered, rulers or subjects, but as equals in the great journey that waited ahead. The age of empires was over. The age of choice had begun. And somewhere, in whatever afterlife might exist, 5 million souls could finally rest in peace, knowing their sacrifice had not been in vain.